It's been more than 4 years since Breath of the Wild launched on the Switch in March of 2017, and almost exactly 2 years since its sequel was announced at E3 2019. And skepticism aside, there is a significant chance that this year at E3 is when we see more than the 1-minute trailer of that game that we and all your other favorite content creators have been using and reusing for 24 whole months. And since it's possible or even likely that we see the game in under a week, I wanted to come in under the wire with my last minute hopes and predictions, as well as those of Olivia Gentry of Zelda Universe, for what else we'll have the privilege of knowing about this glorious title by June 15th, 2021. And if you happen to be here after that day, let me know in the comments how right or super not right we are. Feel free to make up your own scoring system and let me know how many points we got. So what do we hope and expect to see from Breath of the Wild 2 at E3 2021? Let's talk about it. Firstly, this is a sliver of what we at fanatixfour are predicting for the E3 Direct of 2021. But if you want our full predictions for what we think will show up from this game to whether we'll see Bayonetta 3 or Metroid Prime 4 or what Smash characters and all that, you'll have to tune into our podcast Saturday at 10 a.m. Eastern Time on youtube.com/directly2you or podcast services. Again, that episode will be our full predictions and it'll be really fun. We're also planning on live streaming the Direct when it happens, so that'll be twitch.tv/fanatixfour. But even if you don't do any of that stuff, definitely remember to come back to this channel after E3 because we are going to have lots of thoughts on what doesn't get shown for months to come. And if you like the way that we talk about Nintendo stuff, definitely do subscribe to the channel so that you can come back for months and months and years and we could be the bestest of friends. E3 and this video and all that stuff, it's going to be a blast. Let's talk about Zelda. First of all, here's the cliff notes for why I think this game is going to show up at E3 at all. And mind you, my personal confidence level is like 90% sure at least. In the last year, we had Skyward Sword announced and Age of Calamity announced and released. Both of these announcements were prefaced with Aonuma saying, "We're working hard on Breath of the Wild sequel and we'll tell you more soon." And his word on whether or not he'll tell us more soon isn't the thing that suggests any announcement date to me, but it's the fact that they've kind of used up their marketing IOUs for the game that does. Nintendo has learned in some cases to approach a fan base having appeased the hot topic so that the less exciting one can shine through. Like if they hadn't mentioned this game before Age of Calamity or Skyward Sword, then suddenly those games wouldn't be the main topic of YouTube videos, but rather, did they cancel Breath of the Wild 2? Or some such nonsense. Obviously the same kind of thing as the Metroid Prime 4 announcement to set up the Samus Returns one on the 3DS. It was the smart play then, but I think Nintendo knows that 2 of those mentions feels like the limit. And in my opinion, if they want to announce anything else at Zelda E3, and I suspect that they do, but tune into the podcast to hear more about that, they have to show at least some of Breath of the Wild sequel, even if it's not due till 2022 for whatever reason. Which brings up my next hope. I haven't landed on a prediction so far, but I suspect in the end it will align with this hope. But I predict that we'll at least get a launch window and hope that we'll get a launch date. And more specifically, I really hope that launch date is 2021. We've talked about this on our podcast several times, but people always bring up the fact that Zeldas notoriously get delayed, which means most people are calling for a 2022 release date. But my gut feeling is that although that's possible, they announced this game in 2019, and the only reason I think we haven't seen multiple delays of it already is that Nintendo hasn't had to bank on Zelda as announcements like they have in the past. Breath of the Wild was a beacon of hope to Wii U owners, so much so that it was the only game at E3 2016. But we've had dozens of games announced and launched between 2019 and now for the Switch, so who's to say Zelda didn't originally intend for a March 2021 or holiday 2020 release, and then it just got delayed internally instead, because they had other stuff to talk to us about. But I do predict that whatever amount of date that we get at E3 is gonna stick, and we're not gonna get a delay from that date. And I would understand if the game came out in 2022, but I really hope the Breath of the Wild sequel comes out this year. Which brings us to the next prediction, the Breath of the Wild sequel, or Breath of the Wild 2. Placeholder titles that I am very ready to not have to use anymore. At some point, we'll be able to call this game by its actual name, and that'll be nice. But man, what that name will be, Bob's your uncle. My prediction is that we do get its name at E3, and I also predict It's not Breath of the Wild 2, no duh, I'm sure, but just saying it because. To be more specific though, I've heard some folks guess that it could be something like Blank of the Wild or Breath of the Blank, but I'm actually gonna guess that it's going to be completely different from that phrasing structure. I think the name will be pretty vague and not something like Majora's Mask or Ocarina of Time, which are pretty pointed names to something in the game, but rather like Breath of the Wild, which does do a better job of describing the vibe rather than the content itself. And my best guess is the name will have something to do with darkness or underground or dungeons or something like that. And the reason I think this is because of my first content prediction and hope. Nintendo has said something to the effect that they're building this Hyrule off of the Hyrule of Breath of the Wild, which is something that's been talked to death at this point. But my last minute prediction here is that they'll do something to still make the world feel at least 90% fresh. Maybe there'll be some familiarity, but it'll ideally be more nostalgic than repetitive. There's a few ways they could do this, either with their tried and true dark world, like Link to the Past, Twilight Princess, Ocarina of Time, Link Between Worlds. That feels a bit too obvious to me and maybe kind of done to death. So the other thing they could do is what's been hinted at from the trailer, where Hyrule Castle lifts up out of the ground. I think they could split the world around like a 3D chessboard and create even more verticality to this, big old map. There could be a Skyloft level world, a ground level world, and then where the ground lifted out to go to the sky would leave behind either underground sections to discover, like we see in the trailer, or underwater sections where Link can now dive and explore the depths of lakes and oceans. And maybe also some open seas with areas reminiscent of travel in Wind Waker. And if we're speaking of things returning, I'd love to see a quick sizzle reel of some of the new enemies that will populate Hyrule. I think these should really fit thematically in this different world. So for reasons I'll explain in a minute, I hope we'll see enemies that are technological in nature, but not Sheikah tech, rather Zonai type tech. I also hope that we'll see stuff like Wolfos or Dodongos or some other classic enemies that just didn't happen to make an appearance in Breath of the Wild, but let's talk about those tech enemies. I'm hoping that we get a bit better feel for the story and setting of the game, which, with the underground setting that I mentioned and we saw in the trailer, a lot of people believe this to be Zonai. From what we know, this is a race that's super old and could stand to have technology that's just totally different from what we've seen in Zelda before. It reminds me more of Mayan stuff than the Sheikah tech, which is based on more like ancient Japanese lore. So some Zonai themed Armos or Dark Nuts or whatever would make sense as enemies that would have existed underground for millennia, but are just now coming back to life to keep Link and Zelda out. Something that I think could be really cool is that in the same way that the Sheikah tech was what Link had up his sleeve in Breath of the Wild to be able to efficiently deal with Guardians and the Blight Ganons and all that, I would love for a longtime prediction of mine to be the ace up his sleeve against this new threat. In the trailer, some energy enters into Link's arm, and I've long wondered if this is a form of magic power that'll act similarly to the Sheikah runes from Breath of the Wild. This game is likely to be built with a number of upgrades that would be a lot fewer than we'd expect from a traditional Zelda sequel, but they'd interact with every part of the world in ways that the developers may not even anticipate, as happened with Breath of the Wild. Everything is interconnected, and that gives a constant and rewarding sense of discovery. But thematically, in the same way that the ancient weapons and ancient armor have specific interactions with the Guardians and Sheikah tech, I'd love to see Link's new magic abilities be able to interact with the new latent antagonist, and possibly even the primary antagonist of Ganondorf, since we see these powers are the thing that's interacting with his corpse in the trailer we've got so far. And now here's our friend Olivia from Zelda Universe to really dive in deep on her predictions for Breath of the Wild 2, especially covering the Zonai.
Thanks, Parker. Hey everyone. I definitely have been wondering a lot about how Nintendo plans on changing up the map to give us new places to explore and discover. After all, one of the reasons Breath of the Wild was so insanely successful was the aspect of exploration and discovering something new. So there needs to be new things to discover. One of the ways I'm hoping that they could do this is by using the countless mysteries already scattered across the map, specifically the mystery of the Zonai. After all, the ruins we see in Breath of the Wild 2's trailer look extremely similar to the style of the Zonai ruins we see in Breath of the Wild. There isn't anything Sheikah looking about this strange cave Link and Zelda are exploring, and while they could leave the civilization a complete mystery, I think that will be a lot of potential left untapped, especially with so many ruins that could somehow influence the story and the map. In the book Creating a Champion, it literally calls the Zonai the greatest mystery in Hyrule that hasn't yet been solved, so why not solve it? And if Link's glowing hand does give him magical abilities that are somehow connected to the Zonai, then we have a new way to interact with the world. This new magic could somehow allow Link to interact with these ruins, similar to how the Sheikah Slate allowed us to interact with the Sheikah Towers and Shrines. Nintendo has placed a ton of mystery throughout the entire map in Breath of the Wild, and a lot of it looks connected to the Zonai. You have the ruins and giant statues all over the Faerun region, the Lome Labyrinths, the Typhlo Ruins, and the Thundra Plateau. And while the ruins in Faerun and the Labyrinths still could have a lot to offer, I am more interested in what the Typhlo Ruins and the Thundra Plateau hint at. For those who don't remember, the Typhlo Ruins are located in the northernmost part of the map, right above the Lost Woods. When you arrive, you are completely surrounded in darkness. In this area, we can see structures similar to the ones we see in the Faerun region, and on the Thundra Plateau, located west of Ridgeland Tower, there are also similar Zonai structures here too. And if you remember, it is constantly storming here without stop. How is that possible? I think it is definitely worth noting the mysterious nature of both these areas. One in complete darkness and the other in endless storms. With Zonai ruins in both areas, I think it's safe to assume that these strange occurrences have something to do with Zonai magic. And with claims that Breath of the Wild 2 will be darker than any other Zelda game, why not use a mysterious civilization that could plunge an entire area into thick darkness or cause eternal storms? Using these ruins and unknown magic would be a perfect way to significantly change up the map and to dry out the story. Interaction with the Sheikah Tower on the Great Plateau triggered other towers to rise up out of the ground, so maybe Link and Zelda could do something similar with the Zonai ruins using its magic. There just has to be more uncovered secrets, especially as there's so much history between the events of Breath of the Wild and what happened 10,000 years ago. At the very least, an entire civilization like the Zonai would have to have some influence in Hyrule's past within that 10,000 year period. So what happened in that massive gap of time? What were the Zonai doing, and why are they no longer around? I believe a lot of information was probably lost between then and the events in Breath of the Wild. After all, the legend of 10,000 years ago only really mentions Kalim and Ganon, not the reanimating corpse seen in the Breath of the Wild 2 teaser trailer, who is, I am assuming, to be Ganondorf. And it definitely doesn't mention a mysterious glowing hand either. We don't know how any of it got down there or why, and I don't think Link and Zelda know either. To me, the answers to these questions have to come from this 10,000 year gap in history, and I believe the Zonai civilization had a big role to play with it, and something happened to them. The question is what?
Speaking of magic, historically, the primary magic holder is none other than Girl Link herself, after whom the franchise is named, The Legend of Girl Link. And this isn't a new or original hope or prediction at this point, but like everybody's talked about, could Zelda be playable? Whether as characters you can switch between on the fly, or there are different sections attributed to one or the other, or actually some kind of co-op between the two, I think so. There's a chance that they keep it a secret even beyond E3, which would make for a huge surprise when the game actually launches, but even if a prediction is too much, it's certainly a hope. The things that we have going for us are the fact that her character model has shorter hair now, which is traditionally easier to program for without hair physics or clipping, and on its own, that's not much, but coupled with her prominence in the trailer, the fact that Aonuma has mentioned that they've wanted to make playable Zelda before, and the fact that she was playable in Age of Calamity, and just the fact that it would be cool. All that adds up to, like, why the flip not?
I have a lot of hope for Zelda being playable in the upcoming game. Right now, it just makes sense to have this option available. It's the perfect time to do this. Nintendo has set up Zelda in a way that prepares her to have a larger role in the game. I'd argue that Breath of the Wild was really a story about her, and if she doesn't progress and have a bigger role in Breath of the Wild 2, it kind of all goes to waste. We saw her arc as a character in Breath of the Wild, and now it's time for her to really let loose and use both her magic and love of field research to help Hyrule. She is perfectly equipped to do and be so much more in Breath of the Wild 2 than she has been in any other Zelda game. I also think Zelda of all people will be driven to find the answers to these mysteries all over Hyrule. She has proven to be a dedicated scholar, and I don't think her curiosity would be limited to just ancient Sheikah technology. This would be an excellent way to make her either a playable character in Breath of the Wild 2, hopefully, or at the very least, a companion that helps and fights alongside Link.
Basically, I, and obviously Olivia, and probably the rest of you, cannot wait to see this game, can't wait to play this game, and I really hope that it shows up at E3. And like I said, we here at fanatixfour and also Zelda Universe, obviously that's their whole thing, are going to be talking way more about this game over the next couple months and years and however long, like a long time. I'm still talking about the first Breath of the Wild, so You better believe it. So be sure to come back to this channel and to Zelda Universe for more information on those things over time. And also remember, like I said, we'll be predicting more things that'll come out of E3 at the Directly to You channel, but this is one that I think has a very high probability of showing up, and I can't wait to find out. But that's what I think. What do you think? A, do you think this game's gonna show up at E3 at all? And also, do you think it's coming out in 2021, 2022, something else? It got canceled. They turned it into a Mario game. They turned it into a Rabbids game. Also, if you're here after E3, let me know in the comments, what do you think I got right or wrong? Some of it may be subjective. And whether you're watching this video on YouTube or on ZeldaUniverse.net, make sure to use both of those comment sections to really talk about this game as much as you want, because a lot of people want to talk about this game. And while you're down there, be sure to like the video and subscribe to fanatixfour for more content like this every week from me and from AJ and from whatever guests we have on as well. And also, if you're interested in long-form Nintendo content, please do go check out our podcast channel, youtube.com/directly to you. We're trying to break 1,000 subscribers on there. We're really close. So for all you know, you could be the one to push it over the edge. But if nothing else, at least you can get some fun content from there. But that's about it for me. Thank you, Olivia, for being on this video, and you for watching it. I'll see you Saturday morning. Peace and blessings.